Have you ever had a hard time comprehending the place of life that you are in? Hey there, I'm Danielle Zapchenk, and thanks so much for joining me today on the Parable Podcast. Please meet adult ministry leader Sharie Behnke as she shares about her parable journey of finding God while going through a challenging season.
I was just so frustrated that I found myself in this role that I never asked for at all. It actually strived to prevent. It was such a hard thing to navigate, wrestling with God.
Here's my conversation with Sharie Behnke. I am thrilled to introduce you to Sharie Behnke. Sherri and I met last fall at a boot camp for Women's Speaker Collective. And this is where I go around the room and I'm zoning in on people. And I'm like, yes, I will invite her and her and her. I mean, I pretty much almost invited the entire room. But Sherri, you are one of my first to join us today. Thank you so much for being on the Parable Podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. And gosh, what a delight. Thank you. First of all, what an honor to just be invited. But I agree with you. Whenever we got to know each other last October and just a room full of women, I was just in awe. I was just like, this is amazing. It's amazing to just be able to get to know the ladies, network in any way, encourage one another. It was a blast. And so it was a delight, and I'm honored to be here. So thanks for the invite.
I'd love to go back all the way to your childhood, Sherri. You know, I was thinking about my childhood the other day, and I was laughing to myself because I created this club. I would say first or second grade. I called it the Pink Ladies because I guess I already watched Grease. And I really have no idea what I did. But I had Happy Hug Day in 7th and 8th grade where I made things to wear. What was your childhood like? Did you yes, I'm going to be in clubs? Were you a book girl? Imagination? What was it like?
Oh my gosh, great question. Kind of all of the above, and yet some of, I think I got to give you a snapshot of how I grew up.
Okay.
That'll give you a better idea of what I mean. So I grew up in a teeny tiny town in Oklahoma. Ever been to Dover, Oklahoma?
I've never been to Oklahoma.
Well, Dover, Oklahoma, population 500, Danielle, oh my gosh, the great metropolis of 500 people. I think it might have dwindled to 400 since I've moved away, which has been a while. But my whole family lives there. Mm-hmm. And my mom is the oldest of 7 sisters. Wow. And so me and my mom and my sister, so my mom was a single mom, we lived on a red dirt road mile in the middle of nowhere. And then right down the road was my Aunt Jane and all my cousins, and then my Aunt Robin and all my cousins, my Aunt Melody and all my cousins, my Aunt Margot, all my cousins, and then Aunt Joni. And then we did have a crazy Aunt Lisa, but 7 sisters, surely somebody is just a little crazy.
Somebody has to be the crazy one. Yeah,
exactly. And she was the youngest, which then she was more in line with the cousins and my sister and I than she was with even my mom. And so surrounded by family in this little teeny tiny town, far from God. I mean, gosh, if you grew up in Oklahoma, church is part of that culture there, but I did not grow up close to God at all. And because my high school was so small, I did everything. And so something about being in a small town can give you a little inflated view of yourself, I think, especially if you're, it's you want to play softball? Yes, you're on the team. You want to play basketball? Yes, you're on a team. But I got to do it all too, which I thought was just really a wonderful experience that I kind of wish my boys who are, in high school now, they don't have that kind of broader experience. And I got to be involved with everything. I was a cheerleader. I was a head cheerleader. But far from God, but surrounded by family. Mm-hmm. But God, plucked me out of Oklahoma at a real young age. I was pregnant before I got married, but the father of my daughter, we did get married and we moved to Northwest Indiana when I was 20. Mm-hmm. So I got married when I was 20. And had a baby and moved 800 miles away from my mama.
Wow.
Which at the time I would have said was exactly what's so crazy about that. And now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I broke my mom's heart. I must have terrified her at the time. But I was living my life. I was pretty self-reliant. I identify as an Enneagram 8. And I was like, of course, that's what I would do.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're definitely going to jump into a little bit more of Sherrie's story in a bit. Yeah. But if you're like, oh, I have questions about that. Oh, I do. And we will definitely go there. But Sherrie, when you think about yourself, is there anything that like people would possibly misunderstand about you? For me, I think growing up, I'm a very emotional person, so I cry often. And so sometimes people see that as, at least I thought they saw it as weakness or that I was just sad, but really it just had so many different emotions for me. Anything for you?
I would say where I feel I'm most misunderstood is I think of how I grew up and how I'm wired. I do have a sense of self-reliance and self-resiliency and self-assuredness, which makes me feel, and people make an assumption that I'm just maybe have it all together sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's
I really
good.
don't. Or that I'm way more, that maybe I'm tougher than tenderhearted. And I'm actually really tenderhearted. Unlike you who have the tears and don't mind being vulnerable, that is a very scary word for me. I am learning how to be vulnerable. And I've seen the value of vulnerability. But that's been a learned trait. That's not something that comes natural to me.
Yeah.
But I'm way more tenderhearted than people really realize.
Okay, because you said the word vulnerable, I am just interested to know, does that mean when you want to be vulnerable with somebody or you're just sharing your story, for you, does it feel like, okay, well, I don't want to give too much because I've been hurt on the other end?
Definitely. And I think, especially whenever I can look back at seasons where I just could not be vulnerable and even opportunities now, that's exactly what it's tied to is a fear of being hurt, fear of being rejected, maybe even ostracized. I've had that experience before, which is just a really, really painful emotion. And that was rooted whenever I was a little girl, so it's so hardwired in, where vulnerability about my story feels easier because it's kind of, what the public has seen. I can't really hide from some of those things. But then whenever it comes to, I know what my button is. And I have some safe people that I'm able to be fully vulnerable with. I have to coach myself through it, by the way. Yeah. It really is a conversation.
That's interesting. That's cool. Yeah. Sherrie, what are you currently passionate about? You're from Oklahoma, you were in Indiana, and now you are in the Chicago suburbs. Yes. Tell us, what you do day to day, what you're passionate about.
I think a broad theme in my life of what I'm passionate about. First of all, I'm multi-passionate. So trying to nail me down on one passion is really hard. But I feel like I'm kind of beginning to go, I think I can tie this in a bow. And what I'm really passionate about is really helping people unlock this kind of radical human potential. We are created by a wonderful God. We are fearfully and wonderfully created by God on purpose, for a purpose. And I feel like my whole life story has been driving towards that, not only for myself, but then for others. And the cool thing is I'm on staff at a church, multi-site church in the Chicagoland area as an adult ministry director. And my work is doing that. My work is helping people develop and discover who they were created to be so they can be the fullness of who God created them to be. And that gets me fired up no matter what I'm doing, whether it's, adult ministry director, which is kind of my role in small groups and leadership development and just helping people foster a growing relationship with God. But all the other spaces I find myself in, I'm a runner, I'm part of a run group, and I feel like I bring that into that space as well. So it's kind of like wherever I go, that's kind of what I am just really personally passionate about.
That's really great, Sherrie, especially to have people surround us to encourage us, because for some of us, it is hard. Either we just get excited about a lot of things or we're just like overwhelmed with the idea of like, what is my passion? And sometimes I think that's seasonally too, where it has changed and shifted. Right now for myself, I kind of find myself loving high school age children. I have a daughter who's a freshman and I love her friends. And I'm also chaperoning a lot of show choir events. And it's my jam. Like, I love these kids so much. But I was a theater. We were talking about how I know a lot of the songs from the musical Oklahoma. And so I'm like, yes, I'm thriving here in this space. But do you notice that people change their passions based on the season of life that they're in?
I mean, I've known that to be true for me. And I've also witnessed people I'm just in awe of people who got a passion as a young kiddo and like they're, midlife and they're still living that out. That's really cool. I think different seasons kind of bring different passions out in us. And if we're, willing to kind of lean into the path that God is pulling us through and on, the passions kind of pop up at different times in our life. For example, I'll share this. This is what I mean by a passion. I have a passion for teaching. I really do. There is something about the first time I got to give a message at our church in the pulpit, I guess some people would call it that, but just a Sunday message. When I stepped on stage, I felt like I was stepping into who I was created to be. It ignited a passion in me that I just didn't even know was there. But had I not had the courage to kind of do that and lean into that, I have no training in like any formal teaching or communication or anything like that. So that's just kind of like a passion that went boop, just kind of popped into my life. But prior to that, I had a passion of deep learning. I kind of can nerd out on subject matters that people near me don't really like anyway. But I have a passion for learning, but I see how my passion for learning helped fuel my passion for teaching as well. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, I would say my husband thinks I use this word too much, curious, but Eric, I'm going to use it. But I really think that is my personality of just how I ask questions when I see people and I just like look at them and they'll say one sentence. I'm like, okay, well, I need to know more. And so I wasn't a great learner in school, but I do just like seek more information or I want to understand the why behind it. And I think if I look at my teaching style, it does give that why behind it of like, why do we do these things? Or why do we think this way? Yeah. So I can see that definitely play out. That's very interesting. I love that. I love also that you ask me questions back. Most people don't. So this is great. All right. Well, Sherri, the Parable Podcast is about people's stories and learning, kind of just like reminiscing and reflecting on where God has taken us throughout our life. So I know it starts back in Oklahoma. So I'd love for you to share with us what your parable story is.
I feel like my parable story are these vignettes where God has just kind of showed up in my life in different seasons. And I have a parable of, when I think about scripture anyway, the parable that I am just so drawn to is in John 15, where Jesus he has his followers surrounding him and he is saying, abide in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And he really kind of, has this entire story of this vineyard and vines, and I am the vine and you are the branches, which paints just this really great description. One of the reasons why I'm drawn to that story is because it's one of the last times Jesus is speaking to his disciples before he's arrested. And there is something I think that's unique about knowing it's someone's kind of last words that we lean in and take notice. And I would say those are words that I'm really drawn to. Are you familiar with Randy Pausch and The Last Lecture? Have you read that book? Or
No.
This was long ago, back in the YouTube days before viral even happened.
Yes.
So Randy Pausch he was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. And kind of like a real honor is to be invited, if you're a professor, to give kind of like your last lecture. It's kind of like these, words of encouragement and wisdom that you want to pass on if in some case this happened to be your last lecture. And so it's something you get invited to about a year in advance, so you have plenty of time to prepare. Well, the irony was when Randy Pausch was invited, by the time he gave his message, it really was going to be his last lecture. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and had been given a short time to live. And so when he showed up to give his kind of last lecture, it was standing room only, packed house. It was recorded and put on YouTube, and probably one of the first YouTube videos that ever went viral. And so there's just something about someone's last words that make us lean in. And this is why I'm sensitive to it. We'll go back to Oklahoma and then we'll leap forward into this year. So as I mentioned, I left Oklahoma, lived in Northwest Indiana with my first husband. It was back in 1990, guys. And as I was raised by a single mom, and my husband as well was raised by a single mom, and we had this fierce commitment to one another, young folks, but fiercely committed to one another, fiercely committed to our child that was getting ready to be born. And gosh, we started living what would some people say felt like the American dream anyway for both of us. He had a full-time job, doing well at that. After having my daughter, Alex, I went back to work and worked full-time as well. We were able to buy a house, get a dog, and really just, it felt like to me living the American dream. Mm-hmm. If I could go back and just kind of look at my heart, look at what I was doing. We both were successful in our jobs. My daughter was doing great. We really just had great things going on. We did not have a relationship with God, did not have a faith background. That wasn't anything that was ever on my radar. Mm-hmm. In 98, so after 8 years of marriage, my first husband was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma at a young age. And here's the thing. When you're 20, 28 at the time, cancer isn't scary, if that makes any sense. And you just kind of have these kind of conversations about, man, that'll be great when we kind of get through this. It's kind of a pain in the butt, to go to doctor's appointments and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But after 2 years of treatment, the cancer was still present. I was working full time. He was still working full time. They recommended, because he wasn't responding to treatment, that he would get a stem cell transplant. And a stem cell transplant isn't just something you go and do. It's really a long process. I don't want to get into the weeds of that, but it's like a 6-month process to get a stem cell transplant. And so this would have been in the summer of 2000. My husband was home. He had spent a month in the hospital, home recovering from this stem cell transplant. I'm getting ready for work. We have a nice summer thunderstorm, kind of rolling in the background as we're getting ready for work in the morning. And you hear this big lightning strike. And I was like, whew, that was close. It kind of like made our townhome kind of rock a little bit. And I was like, that's close. But I continued to get ready for work. I didn't think anything of it. My husband's going around checking the TVs, and he was like, I want to make sure the TVs didn't go blowing up, So he's checking the TVs, as any man would do, which is so funny. And a few minutes after kind of those moments, our smoke alarms start going on. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. There's really no sign of fire in our house. But my husband's insisting on going outside and checking, even though it's pouring down. Okay, go outside. You're home, you're sick. Like, why would you do that? But he goes outside, comes running back in. He says, the house is on fire. We need to get out. And so I wake my daughter from sleep. We run outside in pouring rain. And I don't know what I thought I would see out there. Yeah. The entire roof of my house was on fire. Wow. It was just so surreal. And even thinking about it right now. Mm-hmm. But I share that story because it's so pivotal in what happens next. Mm. We were as dumbfounded with life as we could possibly be at this point. And life is a hot mess. It's not the American dream anymore. But our temporary housing got set up at an apartment complex where Community Christian Church had a church in the community center. And after getting settled into our temporary housing, we got the news that my husband was not going to survive his cancer, that this stem cell transplant did not work. And we were just a hot mess. Life was just really pressing us down to the ground. And we thought, maybe we should go to church. I don't know. It's right there. Yeah. And so, we went to church and we sat in the back row and we left during the last songs. We had a hard time comprehending our life, let alone trying to explain the kind of season of life we were in. Yeah. And after a couple weeks of attending, we were having conversations about what to do with life insurance, and it's just stuff you don't think you're ever going to talk about. That's for sure. Life insurance. And then my husband was sharing that we weren't believers. We were just trying to find help. And he was like, I'm sure heaven is a great place, but I don't really think I want to go there right now. This doesn't seem like a good thing. I feel like I'm going to miss you. Here we are, we're young, 30s, heaven's not what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But we got up Sunday morning, went to church, and service was on What's Heaven Like. And to be honest with you, Danielle, I cannot tell you specifically everything that was shared, but just in a lightning strike moment in our hearts, God was real. We felt seen, heard, loved, cared for. And it's not a story you're going to find in scripture, but it's a story that's just emblazoned on my heart.
Yeah.
And even as my faith has kind of ebbed and flowed since then, it's just like I can cling to that moment. I felt seen by God since, but man, in that moment, it was just God became very, very real in a really hard time when we felt pressed to the ground. It was his love that definitely met us there.
Yeah.
That's for sure. My husband ended up passing. We got married, or we got baptized actually as an entire family. My daughter, my husband, and I got baptized shortly after that. And then in January of 2001, he did pass away. But just a pivotal moment in my life. I feel like it's hard to even explain my life if I don't kind of share that experience of God kind of just showing up in an undeniable way. Still, even as a Christ follower at that moment, getting baptized, I'm not certain I could say I knew what it meant. I found myself the next several months going, who have I committed to and why is this a good idea? Like, it didn't feel like the story was, unfolding the way that I thought it would at that time. But, God was so gracious, even without me knowing. If I can look back just at seasons in my life, I know his presence was there. I just wasn't. And I believe we see what we're looking for, and if we're looking for him, we'll find him.
Yeah. Sherri, you had mentioned, those last words were really important. And I'd be interested to know, like, towards the end of your husband's life, as your whole family got baptized and this trajectory, it has changed, but it is coming to an end. Do you remember anything that he said to you?
I mean, first of all, he was just a great guy. He was 100% of the time. So it doesn't surprise me that he would just, even in death at a young age, felt just so prepared. But we had a journal that he would write in and I would write in. He worked nights at a printing company. He oversaw one of the shifts that worked at night. And so we would often write to each other back and forth. And his love for me and his love for his daughter and just his desire for us to follow our passions. And that has just so resonated with she and I. We both are very passionate people. If you would to meet her, you would be like, passion would be something you would describe her with. And just a deep sense of being loved. But also, I think when you witness someone die so young, at least for me, it feels like life is such a gift and it's an honor to get older. And that the best way to honor my husband, who didn't get to live life to the full, is to live life to the full. Yeah. And my daughter and I just feel that in our bones. That's for sure, that we want to live life and life to the full. I think that's why I say that, one of my passions is, unlocking the radical human potential in people, because it's just like life is a gift, but it's fueled by the passion that I felt my first husband gave me permission to lean into. Yeah, that fuels that passion. Yeah. That's for sure. You had really no inclination. Your family didn't go to church at all. And so through that process of now knowing what you know now, did you ever, in your 20s, when you were married, when you left Oklahoma, even walking through his health struggle, what was your husband's name by chance? Dennis. Thank you for Dennis. Asking. Yeah. When Dennis is, towards the end of his life, did you ever is there anything else out there? Like, what were you wondering? You obviously knew that some other people went to church. Like, was there ever that's so funny. Yes. Like, what was it? Was there anything that was ever tugging on your heart? To be honest, maybe, but my church experience that I had, the wee bit of it that I had, was not a positive experience. And so if there was an inkling, it tended to be met with resistance. Prior to that moment. And to be honest, I was so kind of just stubborn, really stubborn, just heels dug in stubborn. Both my husband and I were. And it's just like, how would I have known God had it not just been such a radical intervention? I don't know. Those are really hard shells to crack. Yeah. Some people really just do. I was one of those people. I was stubborn. And so, yes, there were questions and curiosities, but it just definitely wasn't a default of mine. And if it was, it was probably met with resistance before it was met with openness. I just had to get really, really desperate. Sherri, after Dennis passed, you were now, you were only like 28, 30 years old.
now you were a single mom, just like your mother. And, that has to be a challenge. I had like this mindset shift a couple years ago because I just always imagined widows, white haired in a rocking chair. I'm like, people do pass away earlier than their elder years.
Yeah.
And so, I met a friend. There's a couple women who've been on the podcast just sharing about their stories of loss of their husband. And, what was those first years like? Because you said you felt seen and known by God in this church community, but still there is walking through this turmoil of like, okay, now what do I do?
Single motherhood is really hard for lots of reasons. You're so vulnerable, even in our modern age. But gosh, historically, there's a reason why the scripture tells us to look out for the widow, because it's such a vulnerable season of life if you find yourself in. And then being young too. I feel like, we're the unicorns, and when we find one another, we kind of gather together because, young widows. But my first emotion was I was pissed.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be really honest, I was really, really just angry and frustrated because, I didn't want to be a single mom. Dennis and I, were really fiercely committed to one another, not an ideal relationship, but just really committed to seeing this through. And I was just so dang frustrated that I found myself in this role that I never asked for at all. It actually strived to prevent. And so it was such a hard thing to navigate. Wrestling with God, whenever I said, what did I just sign up for? What have I just committed my life to? Like, it was definitely those kinds of questions. I also was wired for it too. My childhood of seeing my mom surrounded by, all her sisters and just strong women. I also felt very equipped in some instances as well, because we were just a kind of rugged women living on the farm and, kind of working independently, and seeing my mom work so hard. So it's interesting kind of, tension that I found myself in at a young age too. Because now that I look back, I'm like, so young, like when you're living through it, like, I guess you don't really think about those things. You just kind of, this is kind of what life has dealt me. And so you kind of lean into it. But gosh, God was so kind and gracious to be near me. Yeah. Even in the midst of wrestling, kind of think about Jacob wrestling with the angel, or something, and you walk with a limp. You remember those seasons, and you do kind of have this spiritual limp that you walk with. That would be one of them. That's for sure. Yeah.
I loved what you said, Sherri, of finding myself in a role I didn't ask for someone who's listening right now and they feel that way. I didn't ask for this.
Yeah.
What would be your encouragement to them for somebody who's been on the other side?
First of all, I would say cry out to God and share that with our Creator. Gosh, He is, if anything I've learned, He is near the brokenhearted, and He hears you and longs for that intimate relationship with you. And I would say cry out to God about that. We see it all throughout Scripture. We really do, whether it be in the book of Job, but then I think about some of the prophecies of Habakkuk. I mean, they are crying out to God. And I think we can use that, because when we cry out to God in this real authentic way, God meets us there. And it's really the comfort and the peace that can only come from God, that peace that surpasses understanding in the midst of what feels like chaos or abandonment. Really is just His divine Holy Spirit that can enter into that space and really provide us that peace that surpasses understanding, that love that surpasses knowledge, that perseverance that can sustain us, that really the world does not have to offer us. It really comes from Him. So I would say seek God with your whole heart and your whole ticked off heart and beat up and battered and bruised heart. That's what I would say. And then I would also think about this practice that I picked up of silence and solitude. It's been like 7 or 8 years ago now. That's really turned into a gift of mine, is just learning how to be in the presence of God without needing any solutions, just experiencing His presence and let, His presence care for you, like tend to you.
That's
I don't know
good.
if it's making any sense as I kind of say that out loud.
Yeah.
But
You were mentioning that practice before we started recording, and the word, I already started taking notes prior to. When you were sharing that with me, you said having this shift of this mindset of stopping to strive when we go into stillness and solitude. For myself, I could be overachievers club right here. And so that striving, it's this balance is like this tightrope, especially when I do this for ministry. Like I want to do some great things for God, but I'm like, okay, how much can I do? Can I do more? Like, I feel like I need to be constantly going. Yeah, I think the solitude and silence has helped me in a way, just to kind of bring it down. How did you connect with that practice?
I love that you asked that question because I connected with that practice through reluctancy. My stubbornness just rising back up for the occasion. So we want to keep that theme alive. I was part of a Bible study or a curriculum, I guess, through Pete Scassero. He has Emotionally Healthy Discipleship Program, and it's these two programs. One's Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and the other one's Emotionally Healthy Relationship. And so it's kind of like it's a Bible study that a group of girlfriends and I decided to do. And part of that Bible study is a devotional that invites you to spend 2 minutes of silence before the devotional, read the devotional, and then 2 minutes of silence afterwards. And it's just kind of this invitation of sitting in the presence of God. And I ain't got time for that. Like, that was kind of my attitude when I first did it. I was like, this is all great content, but 2 minutes of silence, like, I got stuff to do, right? I got to be productive.
Yes.
And what's interesting, so I went through the group, led the group, and then halfway through leading the group, I kind of leaned into that 2 minutes of silence, but found myself just waning it. It's very, very hard if you're not used to it. 2 minutes feels so epic. It's just, man, it's the refiner's fire sometimes to sit in silence and stillness. And by the third time leading it at least became a challenge to me personally, who's an achiever, that I felt like I needed to achieve this. I wished I had some greater spiritual desire to do this other than just saying that. That's just the achiever in me, the someone who wants to perform. And so I did. I leaned in to the 2 minutes of silence, and I was like, no, I'm going to do this for 40 days, and just kind of started with a minute, bookending it, and then leaning into, the 2 minutes, and just, after several, the first several weeks were hard, but then it really just kind of became this gift. It was during a season of life and ministry that I was really intensely busy, but yet I felt like I was still being sustained in a way that was just a supernatural energy. But during that season, it was like the spring of 2018, and I was adult ministry director. We had Sunday night services, Sunday afternoon services, Monday night services. I was teaching about 30 times a year, in addition to overseeing our adult ministry, and we had an annual family and marriage conference too. So it was just a busy season, but I saw Memorial Day is coming. That's when small groups kind of go into a different schedule. Our kind of Monday night service was going to go on pause through the summertime. And so that just felt like the light at the end of the tunnel. And these momentary minutes of silence were really sustaining me. And then the day after Memorial Day, I got a call from my sister that my mom had had a massive stroke and was in the hospital in Oklahoma City, ICU, and wasn't expected to make it. And so I quickly got on a plane and flew to Oklahoma, and it's just it was one of those situations where you really don't know what to pray for. Like, a stroke is not something you recover well from. And so I didn't know what to pray. But I just had this resource that I had just been practicing for the past several weeks of this silence of sitting with God that just ministered to me in a way that I just wasn't expecting. And it just helped me to cease from striving, human doing, into a human being. And it just became this wonderful gift in that time period that I've since really learned that I feel like I've always had a striving, when I think about the fruit of the Spirit, striving to be loving, striving to be full of joy, striving to be patient or kind, that I discovered that, gosh, if I could rest there, if I could begin there, if I could abide there, back to the kind of parable I shared from John 15, if I could abide in God, all that is given to you. And it's like you don't have to pluck one piece of it. You get all of it. And so it was really kind of that moment, I guess, that really just kind of rooted my identity and God in a way that I just hadn't experienced.
Yeah. Well, Sherri, thank you. You know what? You said sometimes you weren't vulnerable, but I felt you were in this episode. So thank you so much for really sharing, walking us through all these different vignettes of your life. Yeah. I think when we do this, it helps us recognize this for ourselves too. Of like, oh yeah, I do remember that time, or this time was really challenging, but look where God has brought me. So thank you so much for opening our eyes to those moments for you and how that reflects back into us. Awesome. If people wanted to get connected to you, Sherri, what is the best way they can do that? SherrieB123@gmail.com is my personal email address. And then you can find me on Instagram, the same place, SherrieB123. Don't go looking for lots of content there, but I do have an Instagram account. That's okay. That's all right. Just to set some expectations, but yeah. All right, great. Well, we'll put all of Sherri's information in today's show notes. Sherri, thank you so much for being on the Parable Podcast. Thank you. It's been a delight. Well, whether this is your first or 50th episode that you've ever listened to of the Parable Podcast, we appreciate you. Without you, we really wouldn't be able to share stories like Sherri's. And if Sherri's story really made an impact on you, could you do me a favor? If you know somebody who is asking, you know what, I didn't ask for this, God, maybe this is an opportunity for you to share this episode. This is a way that we build our empathy, and maybe you feel like you don't have the right words, but Sherri does, and it's going to connect with them on a different level. So thank you so much. To connect with her, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Sherri today. Number 1. What are some last words that have really impacted you and why? And number 2, you might have already guessed this, but I would love for you to set a timer for 2 minutes and just give yourself an experience of solitude and silence and just try it as an effort to stop striving today. I promise I'm going to do it as well. This episode was edited by my sweet husband, Eric Zapchenk, and we hope that you were encouraged to think about your own parable story. Remember, your parable showcases how God sees you in the mess and hears the cry of your heart. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.